All right. And you can just make sure to mute yourself while whenever you're not speaking. Good afternoon, guys. Thank you guys so much for being here. About to get started in a few minutes. Today, we're having a Facebook Live on a very important topic. Our topic is COVID-19 vaccines in the Latino community. I know there's been a lot of publicity on the news about vaccines and stuff going on with the trials, and a lot of people have concerns about the process that these trials are taking to make sure the vaccines are safe. So we wanted to have this Facebook Live so to give you guys the opportunity to ask Dr. Paulina Rebolledo questions about the vaccine and to also hear about the truth about how vaccines work, the processes that exist to keep them safe, and why it's important that everyone gets involved in the vaccine trials. So Dr. Rebolledo, would you like to take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Genesis, for having me today, and welcome everybody to this Facebook Live. And so my name is Paulina Rebolledo. I'm an infectious disease doctor with Emory University, and I practice at Grady. And I have been involved in some of the research studies around COVID treatments for patients who are hospitalized, as well as different types of testing. And then now with vaccine trials as part of our clinical trials unit. I'm originally from Mexico, and I'm very excited to be here with you and answer all of your questions about vaccines and so forth. So thank you.
No, thank you. So to start off, could you explain to us exactly how do vaccines work? What is it that happens to your body when you're injected with a vaccine?
So that's a really great question and a good way to start. And so in general, vaccines, the way that our body reacts whenever it comes in contact with a bacteria or a virus or a parasite is that its immune system, it will cause the body to create antibodies against that particular infection. And then what a vaccine does is that it sort of forces your immune system to try to create these types of antibodies to a particular infection. In general, by having sort of like a inactivated version or a very weak version of that infection. And then that way it creates this antibody production, and then when your body comes in contact again with that infection in the future, since it has memory of how to react to it, then the immune system can have a response, and then they know exactly sort of like what to do. So it essentially stimulates your immune system to produce those antibodies. Similarly, how it would occur if you were exposed directly to that bacteria or virus. And then after you get vaccinated, then you develop this immunity for the disease. So you come in contact with it again, then the infection would either be a lot milder, or you would be protected from developing infection.
Very cool. So just to confirm, when you get the COVID vaccine, or if you sign up for a trial, you don't get injected with COVID. You get injected with like another form of the virus, right?
Correct. So there's different types of COVID vaccines, and as you mentioned, there's none of them right now under the different phases of study where you're actually getting the COVID virus. And so what you're getting is either a piece or a particle of that virus that is very specific to coronavirus, and so it will cause the immune system to produce antibodies against that the virus, so that when then you would become in contact with the virus, then you would have protection from it. And then there's other vaccine candidates where they use another type of virus, which is, for example, one of them is adenovirus, which is a virus that commonly causes like colds in a lot of different people. It causes it in animals and like monkeys and in different species. And they use that virus, they manipulate it so it's like a very weak virus, and they replace some of the proteins that are from the coronavirus. And so the same way that virus is almost like a vehicle or a transport way to get it into the body. It delivers that particle of the coronavirus so that it stimulates your body to create antibodies, and then that protects you in a similar way. But none of the vaccine candidates are using the coronavirus that would cause the infection per se to inject it into your body to cause this response against the virus.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So a lot of times when people get vaccines, right? At least I've heard my mom say like, "Oh, I got the flu vaccine and it gave me the flu," but it was probably just like their body was reacting to whatever was in the vaccine, right? Not that they actually had.
Yeah, exactly. So usually, we hear that like very commonly, and saying like, oh, well, I got the flu shot, and I think it gave me the flu and I felt worse. And what really is occurring in those symptoms are real. It's not that people are not having them or experiencing them. It's that all of those symptoms are part of your immune response trying to sort of like develop memory and develop antibody in response to those little particles to help you when you would encounter the virus in the future. But it's just that it's stimulating your body to produce sort of like the defenses and what we want it to have. So when it comes in contact with with the real virus.
All right, very cool. Thank you. I mean, I see why now like it's important that people like study science and actually understand everything that goes into these things. So I guess my follow up question for that is like, we know that this is a unique situation. Obviously, there's like a time crunch for us to get the COVID vaccine out. What are the steps the government is taking to make sure the vaccines are safe once they do come out?
So the steps that in general, like the way that clinical trials for vaccine work is that it's a stepwise approach. So there has to be many different like phases and many different steps from the time that we want to develop, from the time of conception to when we actually give it to the population. And those steps have all occurred. It is just that because of the pressing need to have a vaccine against the coronavirus, because of the enormous impact that it's had on the population, on the planet as a whole, that a lot of the different steps along the way that tend to take a lot of time due to like regulatory approvals or different sort of like administration processes, those have in some sort of way been fast-tracked. And then there's been an enormous amount of resources allocated to be able to do all of these different studies. So traditionally in the past, there had to be like different steps, and all of them require, they require a lot of funds. And so what has happened now is that industry, so those sort of like the pharmaceutical companies, as well as the different institutes of health and different academic institutions all across the world, they have gotten together and almost like directed all of those funds to be able to sort of like go through all these different stepwise approaches in the vaccine. So that again, it's important to understand that the different phases to do the vaccine studies, all of those have occurred. And in general, just to sort of like go through them on like what happens from the time of conception to the time of when they actually get implemented, is at first we have like an exploratory phase, and that's when we decide that okay, this is an infection that is causing a lot of like a lot of complications in different populations, and so that we want to try to find if we can get a vaccine to prevent it. And then that's usually when they have, they sort of like in the very initial like basic science studies. And then from that, it goes into like a preclinical phase or before humans. And that's when usually we use like cells that are cultivated in the lab, or certain kind of like, animal studies that prove that that there's an immune response causing those, or there's like changes at the level of the cells. And then after that, then that's when we go into like human studies. And the human studies, there's in general, there's like, again, different phases between those. And that's usually the first phase within the human phase is when we give it to healthy people, and we just want to see if it's safe. And so we will, and it's smaller amounts of like people. So we just see if it's safe, how people received it. And we are not yet trying to see if there's any sort of like immune response to the vaccine. And then after that, then phase 2 comes on, and that's when we start to see whether like how the immune response is reacting to the presence of vaccine. Again, we're assessing safety because it's going to include a lot more people than that first phase that I mentioned. And there'll also start to be different sort of like doses, and seeing like which dose gives you a certain immune response, and which one is the minimum dose that we can see that production of antibodies occur. And then after that comes phase 3, which is where we are right now with the 5 vaccine candidates that we have. And that's where we basically include thousands of people, and we want to see how, again, the safety, and then that dose that we decided on in phase 2, like now we give it to more people, and then we kind of like follow them for a long period of time to see, again, the safety, how they react, and then see how, as they become exposed to the virus from natural sort of like normal life conditions, like does it ultimately protect it from getting the infection. And then after that, so when we're done with that phase 3, so when you hear about like people say, we hope to have a vaccine candidate at the end of 2020 or at the beginning of 2021, that doesn't mean that it will end there. Then following that, then there's many, many years where you continue to assess safety, where we continue to see what's happening with the virus. Is it going down? Is it going up? So what we call surveillance, where we're still keeping an eye on all of those different like safety measures and what the giving the vaccine to population has done in terms of the ability of the virus or the bacteria or the infection to sort of like persist in the population. And that sort of goes along that phase that I mentioned after we do surveillance. There's a lot of like the post-licensure phase, which is when like then we release it to the different pharmaceutical companies. They start to amp production so that they can get it to different groups of people and just sort of like spread it around for the population. So again, many different phases. What's different with COVID is, again, that it's being expedited in the sense that there's a lot more resources to be able to do all of these phases, but there's not really any shortcuts in terms of like, we didn't skip any of the phases to try to get to where we are today.
No, that's good to know. 'Cause I know, for example, like I think, like I mentioned to you before the call, like maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I think in the AstraZeneca vaccine trial, I'm not sure. Like I saw like all over the news for a good week that like someone who was part of the vaccine trial ended up having like a nerve damage. So do you want to comment on that or clarify what went on?
Yeah, so I think that's something that happens in other vaccine studies, and what they saw is that one of the participants, they had an adverse event, which they had some like nerve paralysis, and so they decided to halt the study as would normally occur. It's not unusual for vaccine studies to be stopped or to be sort of like put on pause while some of these adverse events are examined. It's just as on this occasion, because there's a lot of publicity and a lot of media attention to COVID vaccines, given the situation that we're in as a worldwide. There was a lot of attention, and so it seems like something that was out of the ordinary, but it's something that has occurred in other vaccine studies, and the same processes are being followed. So again, even while they saw that there's been 2 individuals so far that have been identified with those sort of like neurological reactions to the whether they got the vaccine or the placebo. And so as a safety precaution, the study is put on hold. They examine everybody that has been enrolled. They look at the different sort of like side effect, different events, and then they decide, depending on how, when they review them, whether they resume or whether the study is stopped. So again, it's not an unusual thing for it to have been stopped. It's just that it has gotten a lot of attention around it.
See, and that's good to know, because I feel like what you just said was a lot, and I don't think it's enough space to fit in all the headlines that we see about it. Yeah.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that whenever there's any of these adverse events, or even in general to review the data, there's always an independent scientific review board who evaluates all of these different side effects, who really has nothing to do with the core team of the study. So it's not composed of the investigators or of the staff who are involved in the study. It's an independent data like review board. So sort of like another check and balance for the vaccine world, that has, again, sort of reviews everything to make sure that it is being followed according to protocol, and that the data is analyzed in a very rigorous and scientifically sort of sound way.
Okay. I think it's really important to know too, right? Like the people aren't just here doing trials like at their own, like doing whatever they want. Like they have to do a lot of checks and balances in place to make sure that they're done safely and they do what they're supposed to do. So along that vein, I know a lot of young people, especially the ones I know, they have a lot of concerns about the vaccine trials because, in the past, the US has done a lot of really messed up things in the name of science, in the name of vaccine trials, in the name of trying to find treatments specifically to people of color. So what would you say to people with concerns about, like, Tuskegee and like the so many stories you've heard of people of color being used for vaccine trials?
So I think, yeah, that's obviously a very important and something that we are very cognizant that we need to address as a medical community, because based on those very tragic events that had happened throughout history, we have to be even more transparent in the work that we do, and gaining that trust and doing the work to try to inform people, and again give them the opportunity to both participate but also to decline, but having the correct information. So I think a lot of the things that have been put in place are these independent monitors that I was talking about with regards to review of safety events or adverse events, as well as the data, and that and so those checks and balances that have been put in place are precisely for that, to make sure that the data is rigorous. And the other thing is that, obviously we have had a track record with communities of color where there have been, the communities of colors have been used in certain ways to try, not in a ethical way to try to answer certain questions. But again, having them, being very intentional about having people from the community listen to what these trials are about, being very transparent. A lot of the pharmaceutical companies have released their protocols so that people can review them. They're publicly available. Again, to try to just, create that trust or rebuild that trust that what is being done in a scientific way, and that we're not cutting any corners to try to get to have a vaccine in place. So I would say that a lot of us are also in this, and we are, we want to reach the community because we want to give them the option to participate and know what it's all about. Ultimately, nobody's going to be vaccinated against their will. Nobody's going to have to participate if they do not want to or they don't feel comfortable. We just want to give people the option, and we want to give them as much information in their language, in their cultural context, so that then they can make their own decisions as individuals, as families, as members of the community on whether they want to participate or not. But there's really no choice if you don't have a voice, and so I think that's what our goal is, to try to give people.
I think one thing you touched on too, right, is that if you think back to all these events in history that happened, right, there's been a lot of laws and a lot of things set in place since then to make sure those things don't happen again. Right, there's a lot of checks and balances, review boards that have been created since
Exactly.
to make sure that.
And every study, the other important piece that sometimes for us, since we do it all the time, we forget that it's important to mention. But there's the institutional review boards, so the IRBs, and so those exist on many different levels. So they exist in universities, they exist in companies, and so all of those are made up of people that, again, they're either they're physicians or members of the community, they're members of a lot of different disciplines, and that those were put exactly in place for that purpose, based on those tragic events in history where people were not consented appropriately, where they were not told what is being happened, they were not given a voice, and there's a lot of protections to try to a lot of, I guess, checks and balances to protect people of color, as well as for example, children, prisoners, detainees, pregnant women. So again, each of those populations have certain things that you need to be able to meet before you could conduct or approach them for research in any meaningful way.
That's pretty good to know. Thank you for clarifying that. The next question I wanted to ask is, why is it important for Latinos and really for all communities of color to participate in the vaccine trials, besides, the importance of having a voice and making sure that you understand what's going on?
So I think the way that, we think about it as medical doctors and scientists is that we got to think about who has been affected the most as a population or a community in terms of COVID. And when we think about that with all vaccines, and so that's why, a lot of vaccines are heavily placed on children, because usually those are the ones initially when they don't have immunity and they're highest risk. So we got to think about it in a similar way with COVID. And so who has COVID affected disproportionately the most, and that has been communities of color. And so again, African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans. And so, and the same way as a lot of them are a lot of essential workers or key workers that keep our community going, are part of those three different ethnicities and races. And so that's why if we don't have the presence of those populations, which are the highest at risk for acquiring COVID, then we may not be able to tell whether the vaccine is effective. And we want to also try to have inclusion of those populations as much as possible, because again, they are the ones that are, at highest risk for acquiring COVID. So not including them in a trial would not be the right thing to do. And a lot of the different vaccine studies that are going on, they have that they need to have a representation from those communities because of what I mentioned, because they are at highest risk, and so it would just not be right to not include them or not having present when they are the ones who are suffering the most.
Right, and I know you and Dr. Cantos have been working at hospitals since COVID started, treating patients. So I'm sure you guys have a lot to say about that as well.
Yeah, and and I think the other thing is we want to make sure that people also know what it is, what does it entail, or what does it mean to participate in a vaccine study, and have staff on site that speak their language, that understand their cultural context, and sort of what we've mentioned in other Facebook Lives that we've done with you all is to try to be very intentional and tell people that, that when they come and see us, like there's somebody who speaks their language or understands their context, understands their social factors because they live them firsthand. I may not fully understand every single sort of like Latinx community members sort of like cultural context, but it's something that it's familiar, and there's similarities amongst all of the different community members, and have representation and people who who care about them, who know what their communities are going through, and be able to sort of like provide the information that is needed for them to make an informed decision.
Very cool. We have a question from Gigi that's based on what you just said. She wants to know, will children be asked to participate in the trials?
So that's a really important point that is, I think that we all on the scientific community have been sort of raising alarm that children should be participating in these studies. And then the reason why we say that is because I think there's been a lot of, there hasn't been enough attention to how children sort of like are impacted by COVID. And again, how they in a way are, because a lot of them may be asymptomatic, how they can carry disease and transmit disease to other members of the community. So there's a lot of push from the scientific community to try to start trials in children and in younger adults for particularly that reason. Because one, they're getting affected, and the same thing, there's been a lot of reports that came out recently about how the children that have died of COVID or that have had severe COVID, again, they are from communities of color. So it sort of comes back to the same thing. Then the sooner that we are able to have clinical trials where children participate, then I think we will get a better hang of COVID, and we will have a better understanding of how transmission and be able to sort of like contain that within the communities. Because we can give it to everybody, but if the children are not getting it and the children are still getting COVID, then again, the sort of like we need to start vaccinating that population.
Yeah, I think it's especially important now that a lot of school districts are considering to open again. So definitely excited to see.
I think that discussion is sort of like it's up in the air, and there's not any like concrete information on when that will start. But I think a lot of us in the scientific community and a lot of the pediatricians, sort of colleagues, have made that strong voice to try to have earlier on inclusion of children in these vaccine studies for that particular reason.
All right, very cool. And the next question I had is, okay, so let's say the vaccines are approved at the beginning of next year, which I think is when a lot of people are saying it might be approved. Obviously, we got to wait and see. We talked before, there's a lot of factors when it comes to vaccines and the distribution, for example, like how easily they can be made, how easily they can be distributed. But once the vaccines are available to the general population, what societal changes should we expect once they're approved?
So I think that in a way is... it's to be determined, but I will say that even if we have a vaccine that's ready to mass distribute in early 2021, a vaccine is not going to be an immediate fix, because it takes years also to know how effective that vaccine will be, what is happening to the virus. Is the virus going down? Is the vaccine being enough? How many people, what we call uptake, so sort of like how many people are actually taking the vaccine, and then how that vaccine is sort of like working in the population. So I don't think it's going to be a magical solution, and that we are all going to go back to our lives pre-COVID. It's going to have to be a hand-in-hand go hand in hand with mask wearing, with hand hygiene, and with like physical distancing as much as possible. So again, a lot of those preventive measures that right now we know can contain the virus, it's another layer that's going to be added on to try to get the pandemic under control. But none of us think that it's just going to be like a snap of the fingers and like we're going to all take our masks off and go back to to like the clubs or pre-COVID and not have to do any of that anymore.
I think it's good to know. I think when it comes to like any big issues, health issues, whatever, like it's gonna take a lot of different factors for us to get back to normal. But I think vaccines, right, is one important one. The next question I wanted to ask is, if someone is at risk, should they participate in the vaccine trials?
So I guess you mean at risk for COVID, right?
No, I meant like immunocompromised. Like,
yeah. So the exclusion, or I guess the populations right now are individuals that don't participate in the study, or like people, for example, who have like an active cancer, or they're taking particular types of medications for like an immune condition. But in general, like for example, there was a lot of advocacy to try to include people living with HIV. And so if you're living with HIV, that is not in and of itself like an exclusion criteria, or should it be? As long as obviously you're taking medications, your HIV infection is under control. So that population can be considered in a sense whether they're immunosuppressed. But really, the people that we're not including in the trials are just individuals who either have medical conditions that are not well controlled at the time of of when they come to enroll in the study, or people who have those kind of like active cancers or other malignancies where we just, again, because of giving a vaccine, there's a lot of like different factors that may be difficult to tell how the vaccine worked. And so that's why people are excluded for those particular reasons. But really, the exclusion criteria is, again, that just more people with active cancer, people who have had COVID. They can't participate in the trials because otherwise, their immune system is going to be very different than somebody who has not had COVID. And for us to really know whether the vaccine will protect them from a future infection, it's almost like they need to have not had any contact, any first infection with COVID.
That's good to know as well. So that's a question I want. Okay, then along that vein, right? Are there any specific, besides people of color, people who are most at risk for getting COVID, are there any other targets that you guys have for the vaccine? Are there any populations who you guys want?
Yeah, so we have individuals older than 65, and that's the same reason, because they are at risk for severe COVID, sort of like more on the medical condition side. And so individuals that are greater than 65 as a group, and then those who are under 65, people who have medical conditions that would put them at risk for severe COVID, which include sort of like heart disease, obesity, and some other like comorbidities. But those are the other groups that it's important to target because of what we have seen with the complications of severe COVID. And then the individuals more on that have social factors that put them at risk for COVID, those are more the ones that we talked about. So people who are in the service industry or who are healthcare personnel, sort of like the essential workforce in many different avenues that, again, are at risk because of what they do for a living.
Right. And actually, see, someone commented that they were part of the trial.
Oh, good.
Shout out to Eric.
Yay, Eric.
And he said that he got a $1,000 payout. So that could be another incentive for people to participate in the trials.
Yeah, and we do, we give compensation for those trials, again, because, obviously it takes time, and it takes, the visits and the time to come and the transportation and all of that. So that it's part of like, the compensation for participating.
Yeah, is there like a set compensation? There's actually a follow-up question based off of that. Is there a payout or compensation for people?
So there, there's always in a lot of this, in every single like study, there's mention about what happens if somebody has like an adverse event, and the adverse event for all of the studies, it's in general, it's not compensated by the study. That's something that has been a part, sort of like the investigators. If there's a negligence, so let's say that I give a vaccine to somebody and I'm an investigator, and then there's like negligence on my part for something that I like missed or did not follow appropriately based on the protocol, then there is compensation. But if somebody has a side effect or an adverse event to the vaccine itself, there is no compensation, and that's not unique to these studies. That's the way that that studies have been designed as a whole. And there has been some talk about whether if somebody requires a hospitalization, what happens with individuals that are undocumented or that don't have insurance. And I wish there was like a more clear answer on terms of like what that follows. But the way that the protocols are written are that, a lot of, again, going back to if there was something that was not handled appropriately on the side of the site that is doing the vaccine study or the investigator, then that is absorbed by the study itself. But if there's something that happens that you get COVID, then I think that sort of like, falls on the routine care of when somebody would seek medical care. Okay. So it's more compensation for participation in the study, or if something went wrong that was due to negligence of the investigator or one of the staff, but not necessarily because of something that would have happened from, if you later on got COVID, there would be no compensation or no payout because you got COVID and you were in a vaccine study.
Yeah, right. Okay, so is there is it like a minimum compensation that people are getting for enrolling in the trial?
So yeah, it depends on the study, but there's there's a compensation for each of the different visits, and it changes depending on the type of visit and then the follow-up. Because after you get the doses, which are usually the visits that are longer, then when people, if they develop any sort of symptom or we have to do phone call visits, then all of those will have different sort of like monetary amounts that they would get compensated for.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I'm glad that they're compensating people for their time. And then the next question I had is, how do people sign up for the vaccine trial, and is the information safe if they sign up for it?
So yeah, there's a registry. I'm gonna put it in a minute in the chat box, but there is a registry where you can go on, and it's both in Spanish and in English. You can sign up to be, to be eligible for participation. They give you a call after you have registered, and all that information is secure. It's more shared as a sort of like between the different the sites that are conducting the studies, and that's really not, it's done to sort of also try to place people to the location that's closest to them, so that like if you sign up, obviously in Georgia, we don't want it to send you to, to like Florida. So it's sort of like, so all the different sites that are participating in the trials, they share that information, but it's local, and it can sort of like point people in the right direction and which one is the closest to them. I'll share it in a second.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'd love to get that link so people can sign up. And are there any documentation requirements to sign up? Like if you're undocumented, can you sign up for the vaccine trial?
Yes, you can sign up. There's no documentation requirements. The way that the compensation can happen is also through like a gift card. So there's not any requirements necessarily for any type of, it's up to the site, but for ours here, we don't require that. And the compensation is done through like different venues and different types of gift cards and so.
Okay. Very cool. And then if they do sign up, right, like people's personal information who are in vaccine trials is confidential, right? Like it's not shared as any other government entity.
Yes, exactly. It's confidential information that is shared. And when the data is published in a similar way, it's not, nobody will be identified by their name. That data is de-identified. So it's like stripped of everything of where you live, where you're born, where like the date of birth, all of that information. We only keep that information so that we're able to contact you, one, to see if you're interested in participating after you sign up, but then also so we can track you through the duration of the study to make sure that, that we follow up and evaluate for safety and see how people are doing, during the study.
All right. Very cool. That's good to know. And I have a few follow-up questions, but I feel like we already touched it. So I'm just going to summarize and just to clarify, right? If you get the COVID vaccine, it doesn't mean that you won't ever get COVID, right? It just means that you have more immunity if you do get COVID in the future.
Exactly. And one thing to keep in mind is the study, when we're doing the clinical studies, we are comparing the actual vaccine product, so the active study product, if we want to call it that way, against placebo. And placebo, what that means is that it's an inactivated substance that, like, if you look at them side by side, they look exactly the same, but it just doesn't contain the active substance. And the reason why we do that is we have to determine whether the actual study drug or the study vaccine, the actual active substance of the vaccine, if it works. And the way that we do that, similar to every other study, is that you have to compare it against a placebo, which is an inactivated substance. And so once we approve a vaccine and once the vaccine is available to all the public, then that's correct. What you're saying is that if you get the active vaccine, it's been licensed, it's available to be given at, different like drugstores or your doctor's office, then that doesn't mean that you are not going to get COVID whatsoever. It depends on how effective the vaccine, so how good is it at protecting you from getting the vaccine. For example, what we know about flu is that it doesn't protect you 100%, but if you do get exposed to flu and you do get the infection with influenza, then the severity or the degree that you get it is a lot milder than if you would not have had the vaccine.
Okay, it just means that you're better protected if you do get COVID.
Okay, I put it in the chat. And so on there, when you go on the website, there it says, it says volunteer now, and then it takes you through a link and all of the different information. You can have, there's different tabs that talk about like, what does it mean to participate in a study, like what to expect, and sort of like what has, what is the science behind it and what is available to date. Okay,
so people can sign up for vaccine trials at, there you go. Yeah, it's good to know there's like, and people can sign up to participate in the trial regardless of where they're at, right? There's different offices in different parts of Georgia doing it, right?
Yes, and then the other thing is, even if this, because a lot of the vaccines are coming through the same network, even if, for example, one of them closes before you made it and you were a volunteer, you can still get called for the next vaccine that comes.
Right. Okay. Very, very cool. I want to clarify this point as well, right? So if people participate in the vaccine trial, there isn't a risk of them spreading COVID to their family members or to their loved ones because, again, the vaccine does not contain the active COVID virus.
Exactly. It only contains a particle, or it's being given through like another type of, inactivated virus or weaker form of a different virus. And it's almost like it's just delivering the instructions for the body to produce those antibodies that will then protect them from future infections.
Okay. Very, very cool. I mean, those are all the questions that I had, and I know I answered some of the questions throughout the video. So if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the comment section. We would love to answer them, hear about what you guys think about the COVID vaccine. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about the COVID vaccine? Any like concerns that you've been seeing in the community besides the ones we've discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I think because there's a lot of like media attention, whether, again, I think the question that we touched upon about are we skipping any steps to try to get this in a certain time of the year, and I think I just want to reassure the community that all of the different, safety measures are still being put in place and everything is being published as it comes along. There's independent scientific, sort of like committees that are evaluating the results as they come up, and constantly the safety and any events that are happening from the delivery of the vaccine or being participants in the study. So just knowing that there's a lot of eyes around what's going on and a lot of checks and balances. It's not being done without, and it's being done the same rigorous way that we have done in other in other studies. But I do hear a lot of hesitancy from the community or uncertainty about like whether, even if it were available, whether people would want to get it. And I think the more we talk about it and the more information that we get out, then I think people can make those decisions. But I want them to have, or we want them in general as physicians, doctors, and scientists, we want them to have information that is based on the science. Not just like based on like something that somebody said on like the internet, or that like my grandma told me, or or like I got in a WhatsApp. So just have reliable information around it.
Yeah, and I guess who are those reliable sources that we can like listen to when it comes to vaccines and medical advice in general?
So I think a lot of the information you can rely on. Obviously, you all and the LCF distribute a lot of very good, rigorous information. Sometimes it's challenging to navigate in like the internet, because if you type in like COVID vaccine, you're going to get a gazillion different like answers about it. I think, the reputable like media sources that they distribute the information, and then, the like listen to the experts, I would say, and what they're saying, and the reputable data that is coming out, not necessarily just, sort of like here and there, that is being passed, along.
So like, yeah, I mean, doctors, medical professionals, not necessarily news reporters, right? But like
yeah, and
doctors.
trusted like community, community organizations like LCF and other ones that are like interested again in like giving different, like none of us have any stock in like a particular newspaper or a particular, like academic center or person. We just want, the information that I know you all pass along is like based on what is scientifically accurate and that you're getting from like reliable sources.
All right, very cool. I don't think we have any more questions. So, unless do you have anything else you'd like to say before we end for the night?
No, I think we covered it all, and again, just everybody to know that all of these studies are voluntary, and a lot of you can also register there. By registering doesn't mean that you will have to participate. You can We've certainly seen people that they register, then they come in, they talk about it, and then maybe they decide that they don't want to participate, but just sort of like keep an open mind, as we do with many different things, and just try to be, open to, again, like just hearing about it and like seeing what it's all about, coming to see us, and if you, or the different place that's located closer to you. And in the end, if it's not right for you or your family, then obviously that person, everybody has the right to make their own decision. We just need to think about collectively what it means on an individual level, but also for the community. And the more information we have, the better off we'll be.
Right. I just want to reiterate that as well. Like we just want to encourage everyone to, again, rely on credible sources, listen to the facts, do not listen to the hinjavan. No, and like we just want to encourage everyone also to participate in the vaccine trials, even if you're not comfortable with that. When it does come out, please go ahead and get the vaccine as well. And we want people to be able to, get the protection that it has, and we want people to be able to make decisions based off of the facts, right? Don't let yourself get scared by conspiracy theories. And if you guys have any questions about the vaccine trials, I mean, I think the website you said, the PUC probably has like a FAQ section as well. Please speak to a medical professional if you have questions about the vaccine trials. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put the link for people to sign up at the bottom after this live. And yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rebolledo, for your time and for always being available for these lives. We hope everyone has a great rest of their evening. All right, bye.